All right, so this presentation covers Chapter 7, the electoral process. So this chapter is about elections and how they work, how campaigns work, and so on. All right, so the first step in major elections, so for example, this is a presidential election year, the first step is the nomination. And so that is the process that we're currently going through to find candidates for the 2020 presidential election. So nomination is the naming of the final candidates who are going to run in the general election. Okay, so what this means is that the party members kind of get within their party. They select who they want to represent their party as we move forward into the election. So right now, President Trump will most likely get the nomination from his party just because he's already in office. He's the person most likely to win from their party. And then for the Democrats, they're currently in the process of choosing who their final candidate is, and they're going to put out the candidate that they think is most likely to win for their party. At this point, it's looking like Joe Biden, but the results of the nomination are usually not official until the summer. So what we've been experiencing are called primary elections, where party members vote just for the candidates from their party on who they want to move on to the general election. All right, so first of all, when someone wants to run for office, all they have to do is just call it a self-announcement. They just announce that they're running. Again, they can run through a political party. They can run as an independent. They can run from a minor party. And sometimes people who fail to win nomination in one of the major parties might sometimes still run under a minor party. So we talked about that a little bit in Chapter 5. So all it takes is self-announcement. As long as you fit the requirements for the office that you would potentially hold, you can announce that you're running for any position. Okay, and then we move on to what is called the primary. So in Michigan, this already occurred on March 10th, but some states are still going through it. So different states have different dates for this. So what happens is in the primary election, voters head to the polls. Again, they're not choosing who the winner is, but they're choosing which candidate from their party they would like to become the candidate in the next election. It does run like an election though, because you would still show up to the polls and fill out a ballot. Just like you're voting for president, you have to also vote for who you want those candidates to be in the first place. So again, in Michigan, this already occurred, but it is still happening in other states. So there are two main types of primaries. We've got a closed primary and open primary. Michigan uses the open primary system. In a closed primary, only registered official party members can participate. So what this means is if you live in a state with a closed primary system, you have to be an official registered member of a party in order to participate. So that means that if you want to participate in the Democratic primary, you have to be an official registered Democrat. And it's closed to everybody else who's not a party member. We have what's called an open primary in Michigan. So in Michigan, on primary election day, anybody can participate. You can only participate once, so you can only do it for one party, but you don't have to be a registered party member. So even if you're an independent, you can still participate and you can still vote in either party's primary. Again, you can't do both, so you can't double dip, but on that day, you get to show up to the polls and you get to say, okay, I'm participating in the Democratic primary, or okay, I'm participating in the Republican primary. And they hand you the ballot for that party. They don't check your registration to see if you're a party member or not. So in Michigan, we're open. Not every state is, though. Okay, so here's some advantages to closed and open primaries. Closed primaries do prevent the outsiders from coming in and what's called a rating the other party's primary. So, for example, in Michigan, let's say you are a Republican. In Michigan, you could go to the Democratic primary if you wanted and vote for a really weak candidate to try to get an unelectable candidate running for the Democrats to help out your own party. So that's what people do sometimes, unfortunately, when there's open primaries. They take advantage of that and kind of try to get into the other party's primary to sabotage it. So closed primaries prevent that because only registered party members can participate. However, in open primaries, the main advantage is that independent voters get to participate. So remember, there's a lot of Americans who do not belong to a political party. Even if they lean one way or the other, or tend to be more conservative or liberal, they're still technically an independent if they're not part of the party officially. So open primaries allow independent voters to participate, and every year or every turn you would get to decide which party you want to participate because you might change what you want to do every time. Okay, so here's some advantages and disadvantages to the primary system overall. The one main issue with primaries, I would say probably the biggest issue, is that this bottom bullet. Primaries can lead to conflict within the party. So for example, right now the Republicans are a little more unified because they have the president who can run for re-election, so there's not really a lot of other contenders. Within the Democratic Party, there were a ton of candidates who wanted to run for president. And remember, they can only narrow it down to one. So this leads to a lot of arguing and fighting on Democrats versus Democrats. So the party members are kind of against each other when choosing who they want to run. And then eventually it became narrowed down to two main candidates between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden for the Democrats. And still that leads to a lot of tension within that party because some of the Democrats want Bernie Sanders to run and some want Joe Biden to run. So within a party that should be unified, that should be, because they have the same values and beliefs, there's still a lot of bickering and fighting. And again, this happened last presidential election too, because when the final two Democratic candidates were Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, there was still this tension and conflict within the party. So the primary system can lead to that. Also in primary elections, voter turnout is very low. A lot of people do not participate. All right, so most election laws in the United States are actually state laws. So states, for the most part, run how elections work, not the federal law. So basically how it works is that even if it's a federal position, such as president, it's actually 51 different presidential elections, one taking place in each state, rather than one giant presidential election, because each state gets to run it differently. The only thing that is required to be unified is that for federal elections, so this means president, House of Representatives, and Senate, the Constitution has already set the election date. It's the first Tuesday following the first Monday in November of even-numbered years. So what this means is that for the most part, it's the first Tuesday, unless the first Tuesday is the 1st of November. So congressional elections take place every even-numbered year. Presidential elections take place also on even-numbered years, but every 4 years. And the Constitution also requires secret ballots need to be used. Okay, and this is key because before the use of secret ballots, voting was a very intimidating process. People in the olden days, people used to have to voice their votes or tell, okay, I'm voting for this guy. Well, the problem is that sometimes that leads to voter intimidation or pressure or people being threatened or ridiculed for who they want to vote for. So the use of secret ballots is very important because it helps us to feel secure in voting for who we want to vote for truly without feeling that pressure or intimidation. And nobody has to know how you voted. So on election day, most states also hold their state level elections on the same day that we have for federal elections. In Michigan, we do for the most part. So in Michigan, we also elect our governor, state, senate, all on the same election day too to keep it consistent. Absentee voting is becoming more and more popular. This is voting without physically going to the polls. This started in the 1860s to help soldiers who were fighting in the Civil War who weren't able to vote. So without absentee voting, the requirement is that you go to your polling place, which is in your neighborhood, to cast your vote. And this is difficult for the soldiers who were serving the war, so absentee voting started for that reason. What usually happens is that you have to apply for an absentee ballot prior to the election. Then it will come to your house and you get to fill out your vote and mail it in. This in Michigan especially has become very popular. So previously, before 2018, it was required for you to provide a reason for why you needed an absentee ballot. So it couldn't just be because you didn't want to go to the polling place. You had to show a reason. So reasons would be like disability, like if you're a college student who, was far away from home, things like that, travel. Now, Michigan has started allowing no reason absentee ballots, which means that you can get an absentee ballot sent to your house without providing a reason. So this has been great. It has cut down on the lines at the polling places. They're not as long as they used to be. You can vote from your own house. It's also nice too, because when you have your ballot in front of you, you've got the names of all the candidates. So you can sit by the computer or get your phone out and actually research the candidates and take your time to figure out who you want to vote for, instead of trying to make all those decisions when you're at the polling place. So that's really nice. So absentee ballots are definitely becoming a much bigger trend if you do not want to go to the polls, or if you don't have transportation, if you have to work, there's all kinds of reasons. Because remember, election day is on a work day. Okay. All right. So the coattail effect is when a strong candidate who's running for office at the top of the ballot, meaning the more high profile races, they attract voters to that same party for other positions as well. So, for example, President Trump, I would say he's probably the highest profile Republican at the moment because he's the president. So people who love President Trump, who are big fans, they're going to be attracted to the Republican Party in general just based off of President Trump's name and his image. So people who like him are more likely to vote for Republicans in state offices and local offices because somebody very famous and very high profile from that party attracted voters to that party. So that's called the coattail effect. However, reverse can happen too. So if there's a candidate at the top of the ballot who's more high profile and not as popular, they can turn voters away from that party too. So if, let's say, there's somebody who does not like President Trump and they're not a fan, then they're less likely to vote for any other Republican. So that's the reverse coattail effect. Okay, the smallest geographical units within a city are called precincts. So within your city that you live in, it's divided into different precincts, which are different neighborhoods. Usually they're only a few blocks each, and then each precinct has a polling place. So on election day, you would go to your polling place that serves your precinct. Usually they're community buildings, so usually schools, churches, things like that. Okay. And then each state requires secret ballots. So again, the ballots have to be secretive. It cannot be, it's not public knowledge who you voted for. They can't keep track. When you turn in your ballot, nobody's allowed to read it. It has to be secret so that you feel safe voting for who you actually want to vote for. Okay. And the ballot we use is called the Australian ballot, which means that these are all the features of the Australian ballot. It's, again, secretly marked. So there's little folds on it so you can fold it so people don't see who you're voting for. It has to list the name of all the candidates, even people who are running as independents or as minor parties. So that's why you're going to get a ton of candidates to vote for president, not just Republicans and Democrats. It has to be printed at public expense, meaning the money we pay in taxes covers the ballot, so you don't have to buy your own. Oh, also, there's write-ins as well. So going along with listing the names of all the candidates, you're also allowed to write in your own candidate if you would not like to vote for anybody listed. So really, you can vote for whoever you want, even if they're not running. All right. Last thing we're going to talk about is campaign spending. Campaigns, running for office. This is a very, very expensive goal. Okay. It costs a few $1 billion to run for president. To run for the House of Representatives is about $1 million, which doesn't seem as much in comparison, but keep in mind that terms in the House are only 2 years. So if you're, running for the House, you're going to be up for re-election every 2 years. So that's $1 million every 2 years. Okay. Senate, their terms are longer. Their terms are 6 years, so they're not running as often. A Senate campaign costs about $20 million. Why are these so expensive? I put a few of the main costs on the bottom. So a lot of this goes toward advertising, whether through like media, print ads, stickers to give out, posters, campaign headquarters. You got to pay rent on those buildings. You got to pay staff, right? So secretaries, people helping you with your schedule, writing speeches, people who are doing polling, people helping with your advertising, anything that a candidate would send out through mail needs to be paid for, maintaining a website, traveling. So if someone's running for president, they're going to have to travel back and forth from state to state to all these different countries, all these different states to campaign across the country. That gets expensive. And the Senate, someone who's running for Senate, they have to travel throughout the entire state. So that can be expensive too. Representatives do a little less traveling because they just have to worry about their small district, but still travel costs are in there. So where does this money come from? Both private funding and public funding. Okay, so most donors to campaigns are called small contributors. They give $5, $10 once in a while to a campaign. So it doesn't seem like a lot, but when you consider the amount of people donating, it does add up quickly. So again, most campaign contributions come from very small donors. Then there's wealthier people who make larger donations. Sometimes candidates use their own money, so it doesn't hurt to be rich. So that's why, for the most part, the people running for office, they tend to already be very financially well off, and therefore they're able to spend their money. Political action committees, abbreviated PACs, are groups that are linked to interest groups. So we did talk about interest groups a couple chapters ago. And so when interest groups have their issue that they want to promote, what they do is they collect money from their members, put it into a pool. Okay, so that's called political action committee. And so then they go out and they seek the candidates running for office who also support the same issues that they do. So for example, if I am a member of an interest group who, let's say it's an environmental climate change interest group, so I donate my money to the political action committee that represents my interest group. And then the PAC goes out and spends that money on candidates who also support environmental protection, climate change protection, things like that. And they give that money to those candidates to try to get those candidates to win so that when they're in office, they can pass the laws that we want them to pass. Okay, so that's where political action committees come into play. For every candidate running for office, it is public knowledge which interest groups are donating money to that candidate. So you should be able to see before you vote, like what organizations are funding that candidate. Even businesses. So businesses donate their money, like Kroger, Home Depot, they all donate their money to candidates who they think are going to pass laws in their favor. And so you are able to look this all up. This is all public knowledge. Okay. There's also groups that are formed for fundraising. So those are called temporary organizations. Subsidy is public grant money. So when we pay taxes, our tax money goes to the government for different things. Some of that money gets spent on elections. So candidates can apply for a subsidy, which means they get money from the government through our tax dollars to run. So your tax dollars do cover the cost of elections somewhat. All right, why do people donate? Here's some reasons why. First of all, most people donate just because they believe in that party or they believe in that candidate. If there's a candidate that you really, really want to win, you want them to be the next president or the next senator or governor or county leader or whoever, you're more likely to donate if you believe that they're going to make this place a better place, if you believe that they're going to do good things, promote good policies. So most people just vote because they really like that candidate or because they believe in the issues that that candidate also believes in. Sometimes people do vote, though, because they want something in return. So, again, for example, sometimes it's laws like, hey, I'll donate to your campaign. Please pass this law once you're in office. Sometimes people want jobs in the government, so they'll donate and say, hey, I'd really like to work for you once you're in office, so here's a donation, and then eventually they get a job. Some people just want the recognition. They want the certificate saying that they donated, the thank you notes. So, for example, if you donate a decent amount of money to either presidential candidate, you'll get a thank you note from them. Like, some people just want that. So there's a lot of different reasons why people donate to campaigns. The Federal Election Commission is the branch of the government that oversees campaign finance laws to make sure that that candidates are following the laws. All right. Because if someone's running for office, there are laws on how they're allowed to raise money and how they're allowed to spend that money. So, for example, they can't raise money for their campaign and then use that money to redo their kitchen. That would be considered illegal because it's not a campaign expense. So, the Federal Election Commission monitors campaigns in the federal elections. They monitor the candidates to see how they're raising money, are they following the rules, and how they're spending the money. However, the FEC is ineffective. They're underfunded, they're understaffed, which means that they don't always catch everything. So sometimes violations do happen, and they don't. There's campaign financing has definitely been a political issue that's been discussed in recent years on how can we make the FEC more effective so that they can monitor this better. Okay, so here's some examples of rules. Candidates are required to report their campaign finances. So they have to report every single dollar that they raise and where that money's coming from. They also have to show like who donated and how much. They also have to show how that money's spent, every single dollar. So even if it's like, oh, I just bought coffee, to give to my campaign staff, they still have to report that. Okay, so every campaign dollar has to be reported, and every campaign dollar that's spent has to be campaign related. So again, a candidate can't raise money and then use it to put in a new pool. That's not campaign related. Okay. Also, there's limits. Donations by corporations previously were not allowed. Now corporations are allowed to donate to campaigns, so that's definitely opened up the arena for big businesses and corporations to participate. Also, individuals who donate, they're limited to how much they're allowed to donate to. All right, so here's the limits to individual contributions. So in a primary election, a single person is not allowed to give more than $2,300 to one candidate. And then in the general election, no one is allowed to give more than $2,300 again to a candidate running. You're also not allowed to give more than $5,000 per year to any political action committee. So again, any interest group that's going to spend money on campaigns, you're not allowed to give more than that. I know it seems like a lot of money, but there are very rich people out there who, if these laws didn't exist, they would use their influence and their wealth to pretty much buy elections, because there are people in this country who can easily spend $1 million on a campaign if they wanted to. So these limits are in place to prevent elections from being bought by people who are very rich and have a lot of money to spend. All right, and so then again, going back to political action committees, what they do is they work with interest groups. So members of the interest group donate their money to the PAC, and then the PAC spends that money on candidates who support the same issues and who support like causes that the interest group cares about. And they also have to have a reasonable chance of winning too. So for example, the NRA, the National Rifle Association, they spend money on candidates who are going to support laws for gun rights. Educational groups, they're going to spend money on candidates who campaign on education issues. Okay, animal rights groups, they're going to spend money on candidates who are running with animal rights ideas. And so also, presidential campaigns are especially open to public funding. So whenever you file your income taxes, there's a box you can check to contribute to the presidential election campaign fund. And so that money is used to finance presidential campaigns. So if someone's running for president, they do get some of our tax money to be able to pay for this. And then a presidential candidate can choose to accept the subsidy, or they can choose not to and get money from private sources. Most candidates now get money from private sources if they have the means to be able to fundraise and get a lot of money. Okay. All right. So when money is donated, it can be considered either hard money or soft money. Hard money is money that's given directly to a candidate for campaigns. Okay. And hard money is the money that is capped and monitored, right? So that's you can't give more than $2,300. That's hard money. That's money given directly to a person. That every single detail of hard money has to be reported, and it has to be in detail written down and tracked. Soft money is money that you give to the political party, not to a candidate themselves. So people kind of use this loophole. Sometimes there are no limits to how much soft money can be spent. So donors who can't donate any more hard money to a campaign for a specific candidate can donate money to the Democratic Party or the Republican Party themselves. There's no limits to how much money the party can receive. All right, the last thing we're going to go over, this is the Citizens United court case. I put the details at the very end of your notes. So if you go through your notes and you look, the main story of what happened is on there. So in the Citizens United court case, basically what happened was a large organization spent money on an anti-Hillary Clinton ad. This was in 2008, is when the ad took place. The case was in 2010. This was against the law at the time. Corporations and large organizations were not allowed to donate money to political candidates. But the ruling in the court case stated that corporations and large organizations do have the right to donate money and to spend money on elections. This was based on the First Amendment right to free speech. So the court considered campaign donations as a form of symbolic speech. So if you are donating to a candidate, that is your symbolic speech. You are expressing yourself and who you want to win. And so the court ruled that corporations have the right to do so also. So starting in 2010, corporations and large organizations have been allowed to participate in fundraising and spending money on candidates and elections. So it's kind of changing how elections work now. All right, and that is it for this presentation. So if you have any questions, let me know. Reach out if you want to talk about any of this in detail, and I will happily go over any of this with you again. Thanks for watching.